Hello and welcome back to my friend the Rainbow Circle. I haven't been able to shoot episodes lately because I've been extraordinarily busy, and but tonight I'm going to a reading, a poetry reading mostly, but I go to poetry readings and I read fiction. Um, and I was preparing for that, and I thought, there's some interesting things to look at there. Um, I was preparing a short story to read, which is one of those things like if I taught a class, if I ever taught a class, ever in the in the future, if anybody actually let me do that, um, it would be kind of fishy to talk about my own story in a class, but this is just a video, so I'm going to talk about my own story because why not? Who cares? I'm going to. Part of my issue with working on the story is I'm trying to get it down to 5 minutes for the reading. So I'm trying to work on the editing process in order to get it down to 5 minutes. I don't know that that's necessarily what the story needs, and that's one of the important lessons to remember is that a story needs what it needs. It's if you treat it as this pre-existing thing that you're shaping in order to fulfill this story that exists in the universe, to highlight the things that are already there, to cut out the things that don't necessarily need to be there, then the length is ultimately irrelevant. One of my hey, what's that? One of this is Bo. If you're new to this show, this is Bo. I didn't mean to rhyme right there. Named after Bo on the go. Although being short for rainbow would have been a clever reference. But anyway, so the the story that I'm working on, I'm trying to get it down to 5 minutes, and I'm also trying to get videos down shorter. And I'm thinking, but in order to do that, it takes a little bit of practice. Thinking this one I might be able to get down to 10 minutes. We'll see. If the story is actually 5 minutes, then this might end up being 15 minutes or something like that. But it takes a bit of practice to really know the form. I would say that's a big part of where practice comes in. Is if you're trying to write a story of a certain length, if you're trying to write a real short story, it takes a lot of practice. This story came from a challenge, an Olipo type of challenge that I gave myself. I'm being eaten by a cat right now. This is why these videos take so long. I get distracted by animals trying to eat me or getting my attention. I guess my hand tastes good. I was just cutting onions. That might be what she's tasting. I don't know. Weirdo cat. Actually, normal cat. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, this was from an Alipo challenge I had. This was from one called 42 Days of Christmas Stories that went over. It was December of 2017 to January of 2018. And this last Christmas time, I did 27 Days of Christmas Stories. And so with all of the these challenges that I've been doing every year, pretty much every year. I started with 12 Days of Christmas Stories, then I did 22, then I did then I did 22, and then I did 8, and then 30, and then 42, and then 27. It's like 100 and like in the range of 150. I can't do that math that quickly. But I've done a story a day challenges. And that sort of forces you to get to know the form, because writing short stories, like genuinely really, really short stories, was never really a skill that I was very good at. Usually they just ended up being longer for a lot of the reasons that I'll point out when I'm talking about the actual story. But just the practice of forcing myself to write one in a day. This is essentially sorry, baby. This is pretty close to the first draft, so it's a lot of it comes with trying to first draft a full story and posting it on social media, so that there's a bit of a danger to it. Nobody really pays attention to them, so who cares really? But so there's sort of a perception of a danger to writing a really bad story in public. So it sort of heightens that the intensity of the experience, and that's the sort of practice that I think that sort of thing helps you hone your craft to sound real cheesy, or the 10,000 hours thing that I've talked about before, just the actual writing 150, whatever, short stories, one a day, short stories, just back to back to back. That's that sort of practice comes in handy. Even if it's something as simple as just knowing the form, knowing the structure, knowing what you need to do in order to make something just 2 pages or something like that. And most of them are 2 pages. This one ended up being a page in just a little bit. But it's called The Invincible Reindeer. Not the best one of those 42 stories, but the person who's the feature at the reading, this big fan of superheroes. I have a handful of these that are superhero stories. And the technique I use for, usually when I do superhero stories, the technique I use is schematic shifting. Kind of similar to magical realism. I would call it inverted magical realism. Because the way that magical realism works, and I'm not the only one who does that with superheroes. I mean, this is clearly influenced by the tech, a big influence on any sort of superhero story that I write. But it's schematic shifting that functions kind of like magical realism. I do write straight magical realist stories pretty frequently. But the effect of magical realism, and this is something that I'm fixated on at the moment because I've been talking about being part of a panel talking about Toni Morrison, and I don't know. I like Toni Morrison just fine. I don't know a huge amount about her. I'm reluctant to pretend like I'm an expert on Toni Morrison at all. But this is something that she does very well. She does magical realism very well. One of the great American magical realists for sure. But part of so I was thinking, if I end up doing this Toni Morrison thing, that might be the aspect I talk about is the magical realist part, because I know magical realism. I can't pretend I'm an expert on Toni Morrison, but I can talk about magical realism all day. But part of the effect of magical realism is that schematic shifting. So it's a story that presents itself as being mostly realistic, and in talking about realism, this is one of my problems with the name magical realism. Is it's sort of favoring the realist part of it, but the realism is a schema, just like fantasy is a schema, just like fairy tale is a schema, like superheroes is a schema. It's a story structure that you establish early on, and you manage audience expectations by establishing this basic story structure. And so by violating that, you can have a negative effect, and people can dislike the story because you've violated the schema you've established early on, or you can do it really strategically and affect the tone of the story, the emotional impact of the story, that sort of thing. And so Toni Morrison does this brilliantly, and a lot of times it's with ghosts, for example. Just commonly in a lot of her stories, it'll be something like, or novels, it'll be something like, just a mostly normal sort of, establishing the setting as a realistic setting, and then there will be a ghost that people treat as mundane. So it's schematic shifting, because the establishment of the rule system of this universe is that it's a realistic universe, one that you don't expect ghosts in. Once you establish a ghost, it's a schematic shift because it shifts into a different type of story, like a horror story or something like that. If it's a true horror story, and you can make an argument that some of them, like Beloved a horror story in many ways, sure. But in a horror story, the ghost is a menace to the mundane world, and that's the sort of tone that it creates. It creates encroachment in this orderly universe where you have expectations based on reality. Magical realism, it has a magical element like a ghost, but in treating the ghost as a mundane part of everyday life, you're shifting the mood. It's a lot of the times, in horror stories, the importance is placed on the ghost, whereas in a magical realist story, it's flipping around that it's flipping around that um, it's flipping around that relationship of heightened importance, so that the ghost becomes mundane, and that shifts the level of uncanny sort of association with the mundane. So the mundane becomes, magical, and the magical becomes mundane. Um, and so that's schematic shifting in magical realism. It works a lot of different ways. That's just one of the ways that it works. The schematic shifting in a superhero story, a Tick-inspired superhero story, as I said, Tick and Toni Morrison, extremely different things, extremely different type of stories. But a lot of the technique that they're using is similar, where something in the Tick, it'll be presented as a superhero story, but it's a schematic shifting into the mundane. So Tick elevates everything that he encounters as this extremely important thing. He takes the mundane and elevates it, and then it contrasts with Arthur, who's just a normal guy caught up in the superhero world, and he does all these mundane things. So it's sort of the inverse of that magical realism relationship, where it starts off in the scheme of a superhero story, where like the Tick, we don't know where the Tick got his powers or anything like that. There's no real effort into making it believable necessarily, because it's just a superhero story. We're familiar with superhero stories, but the effect is the contrast between the mundane and the super heroic. Already at 11 minutes. This is definitely not going to be 15 minutes. Okay. So this is called the Invincible Reindeer, but it's sort of in that vein, where Invincible Reindeer, obviously influenced by Tick characters. It's a character who could have easily been in the Tick, not the Tick himself, but it could have been one of the other characters. And Ellie's an old character I've had for years and years. She might have gone back like 20 years ago that I started working with that character. Invincible Reindeer is a brand new character. I don't know anything about him. I don't really establish any sort of origin for him or anything like that. But that's part of the function of editing the story and recognizing what sort of length it really needs to be, is because this is if I'm treating Invisible Reindeer as a character that is interesting to me, I follow through with that curiosity and I flesh it out, because that's a lot. I mean, that's the next part of the process that I would follow, is figuring out what aspects of the Invincible Reindeer, what is his real name? Where did he come from? Is that really necessary? Following through with that sort of curiosity. But he sort of just, especially in the format of a story a day, sort of just sprang in to the story, and partly based on the name that just popped up. It's Christmas themed, so I mean, there's it's not entirely random to think of a reindeer. The other character's named Star of Wonder. It's Christmas themed. But a lot of the times, sort of the go-to method I used, and I don't expect anybody else to use, but the sort of go-to method I use in doing quick story a day things is to use pre-established characters. So that's why Ellie is a character I've used for years, and she just sort of cropped up in this story. And she's one that is going to show up in the story I'm slowly working on and tying it into these videos, Giants of this Humble Earth. She's going to be a minor character. I don't know exactly what she's going to do now. But I know she's going to show up for whatever irrational reason. Let me just go ahead and read this straight so I can time it. The Invincible Reindeer may have overhyped his ability when he named himself Invincible, before he ever even had a superhero mission. His first villain was called the Possessed Head, who had a severe case of hydrocephalus, but instead of fluid on the brain, he had spirits swelling his head to a gigantic size. I throw in these parentheticals that, that's part of the spontaneous story a day sort of structure, is I throw parentheticals all over the place. But the possessed head learned, that's an easy one to cut out. But the possessed head learned how to control the spirits, including giving them physical form and amalgamating them into giant ghost bodies he used to make others feel the pain he felt his whole life. And also as revenge for no one ever appreciating his ghost crafting. That's one where just in live performance probably won't translate what that actually means, but I like the rhythm of that, so I'll probably keep that one. In translating live performance, rhythm has a premium here. Something sounding good has a premium over something really translating. All the Invincible Reindeer had to fight him was the strength and horns of a reindeer, certainly not invincibility. That was just a lie, a very counterproductive lie, he now realized. You should really call another superhero like Star of Wonder, said an onlooker struggling to drink hot cocoa without spilling it on her mittens as the Invincible Reindeer battled solid ghost forms. Everybody else in the area already ran away, screaming, but this one lady stood there, rocking back and forth on her feet, stirring her hot cocoa. She's functioning as sort of the anti-Arthur. She has a function like Arthur in The Tick, but sort of flip side of that. Why should I call the Star of Wonder? She's a better superhero than you are. She'd take care of this in no time. Thanks, he said, through battle grunts, so the sarcasm in the tone might have been lost. My pleasure. I'm kind of an expert on these things. My name is Ellie. So, are you really invincible, or is that just a name you called yourself? How does she know his name? I don't know. I mean, that's the sort of thing I would flesh out. Any sort of question like that I would flesh that out as I develop the story. Not too much explanation. The ambiguity is something I want to keep a bit of the ambiguity, but something like that might be distracting because there's no explanation for it. You're having a lot of trouble for someone who's invincible. The Star of Wonder never has this kind of trouble. Oh, yeah? What's her power? I think it's mostly levitation. And that's another thing. The Star of Wonder, I do this spontaneously, piece by piece. Bo was knocking stuff off of the shelf. Don't appreciate that. I do this spontaneously, piece by piece. So I wasn't quite clear on the Star of Wonder's power at this moment, but it plays a big part in the end. So I would definitely flesh that part out. Nah, her identity is mysterious, so no one. Oh, you like her so much. Maybe you're secretly the Star of Wonder. And as a self-contained story, she's definitely not the Star of Wonder, but as a self-contained story, I would let that be an ambiguity. Probably not going to translate live, but I don't really care. Nah, her identity is mysterious, and no one will ever know who she is. Besides, if I was the Star of Wonder, if I were the Star of Wonder, subjunctive. If I were the Star of Wonder, would she say the subjunctive though? I don't know. That's the thing about grammar errors. Would she really get that right? I would have beaten this villain like 20 minutes ago. Thanks. Are you being sarcastic? I wonder. Pun intended. Should have him say pun intended. The possessed head conglomerated multitudinous. Multitudinous is one of those words I always use. I just like the word. I don't care that I overuse it. And conglomerated. Conglomerated multitudinous. You like words, use them. I don't care. The possessed head conglomerated multitudinous ghost forms into a glowing egg-like mass in the sky about the size of a hot air balloon. What do you suppose he's up to? There, that phrasing is really confusing. Need to work on that one. Ellie said and sipped her hot chocolate. The Invincible Reindeer said through deep breaths. He'd been fighting ghost forms for hours now. I don't know, a ghost bomb maybe? He thought afterwards. Why am I even engaging with this person? He thought after that. It's better than engaging with nobody. And this is sort of an anaphora form that I'm sort of weaving in here. And it culminates at the end. I think he wants to kill himself and all of us, Ellie said. Look, he's crying. It seems kind of silly for a ghost. I mean, the whole killing himself and the crying thing. The Invincible Reindeer squinted at the possessed head, whose head was massive, but his face was very small. You can see him crying from here? Do you have supervision? No, I just have good eyes. I eat carrots. You know the old joke about rabbits and glasses. Rabbits don't wear reading glasses because they eat so many carrots. That's an easy cut. I like that characterization of Ellie that she would say that, but in terms of reading it at a reading, it's an easy one to cut. Because if it really worked as a joke, it might be a good laugh line. I don't know, but I don't think it really works as a joke. More of a character thing. He wanted to say that's not a joke. He wanted to say, why would a rabbit need reading glasses to begin with? He wanted to say, rabbits don't read. He wanted to say, I'm adding in some anaphora right there. I don't know if it works, but he wanted to say rabbits have a much broader diet than carrots, but that's beside the point. Instead, all he could say was, that dude's going to blow us all up. She took another sip of hot chocolate. You're going to have to fly that giant bomb into outer space and blow yourself up. You realize that, right? Ellie said as casually as saying, you're going to have to catch that spider and take it outside. Do I really? I mean, you have flight and super strength, so you're able to do it. You're also invulnerable, so it won't actually kill you. I mean, it's all there and so obvious. I don't see why you would even question this. This was the wrong time to confess that he wasn't invulnerable. All he could do was roll his eyes and say, fine, and fly. And this next paragraph is one that I do like to get to this point, and doing story a day challenges will get you to this kind of a point. It's just the sort of thing that you reach, at the end of a novel when you're just exhausted, where it just, sort of flows out. It's not working perfectly. This is the first draft. So it's not working perfectly, but this is sort of, I would edit everything in order to make this ending work. It's not quite working yet, but I would edit everything just in order to make this ending work. The Invincible Reindeer pushed the giant bomb into outer space, and he kept thinking, why did I do this? And he kept thinking, why didn't I call somebody else? And he kept thinking, why didn't I call Star of Wonder like Ellie suggested? And he kept thinking, maybe I can just let it blow up and run away and not worry about all the people who might die. But this was the least favorite of these thoughts. Soon he was outside the atmosphere, and he let the bomb float away from him in the void of space, and then he saw Star of Wonder. She suddenly showed up right in front of him, as if appearing solely in response to his hopeless wishing. Star of Wonder's power was to make anything she blasted float up into a mysterious blue rectangle and disappear. That's one I would shift to earlier to make that work a lot better. She took care of the bomb in no time, and the Invincible Reindeer realized he was floating in the void of space and he would soon freeze and suffocate. All these things happened in the space between nanoseconds. But then he saw Star of Wonder's beam powering up again, perhaps to shoot him into the blue rectangle and into the mysterious blue void, which may be a better way to die than suffocation, and at least for that last moment of his life, This is why I usually memorize these. I just didn't have time to memorize this one. That last moment of his life, he'd witness what that blue space was. And then his will to live kicked in. He had a little bit of power left, whatever mysterious power allowed him to fly. The power that first gave him the sense that he could be heroic and he could be something beyond his old human frailties. And so he used his flight power to push himself back down into the atmosphere. This didn't seem like a smart move after all, as now he had to fall all the way down to Earth. A totally selfish move to prove he had the capacity to enact his heroic power at least one last time. He avoided death by suffocation and death by mysterious blue rectangle, and now he faced death by falling the entire way it was possible to fall. Yet somehow he survived it. Every part of his body was broken, and but he was alive. I did a little bit of editing here. I'm trying to read my own handwriting, and it's terrible. Where was it? He was alive. Ellie was standing there near the crater, still sipping her hot chocolate. Good thing you're invincible, she said. He would have laughed if his lungs hadn't already collapsed. So yeah, I mean, that last section has a lot of potential, and that's the one I personally like. Whether or not you like it, don't really care. But it has a lot of potential. I like it. That's what counts. I think that last part has a lot of potential to work really well. So I would edit the rest of it. I'm not going to be able to do that by the reading tonight. or probably for a couple of months, really, honestly. But just, this little time I've allowed myself to actually edit a story, believe it or not, that's what I care about. And I have to do so many other things having to do with composition writing and whatnot. But which I'm so proud to do. Uh, but every once in a while, I'll squeeze in some editing here and there. But if I'm seriously editing it to really make it the perfect story, and that's first draft with a few tweaks here and there, but essentially the first draft, I would try to highlight that last paragraph. So I like, that his relationship with Star of Wonder. I don't have to go into a whole other story. This is why I struggle with short stories, and clearly I'm struggling with short videos too. I'm not quite used to getting this down to 15 minutes, clearly. But one of the reasons that I would struggle with the short stories is I would say, Invincible Reindeer and Star of Wonder, they seem to, he worshipped, had a hero worship sort of relationship with her, and he was fascinated with the blue triangle. That just kind of popped out in just the process of the story a day, speedily putting all that together. That creates a mystery for me to follow through and say, what is his fascination with the blue triangle? I don't know what the blue triangle is any more than anybody else, but that sort of fascination with it, I could flesh that out and make it really interesting, maybe, hopefully. So it's schematic shifting because the actual focus is not on the hero-villain battle. Ultimately, that's irrelevant whether or not he beats the villain. But the focus is tightened down to more mundane things like his relationship with the stranger who's criticizing him. And some of the stuff could be just logical holes. Like, how does Ellie know all this stuff? So, one of my favorite books of all time that I'm obsessed with for years, that I've read front to back. Hold on. The official deluxe handbook of the Marvel Universe. The deluxe official handbook. I don't know, however you want to say it. This is the essential. There's so many adjectives on this. The essential official handbook of the Marvel Universe deluxe edition. But anyway, I would read this from front to back. Now I need to reread this because I'm doing another panel on the Eternals and the New Gods. So I got to read up on the Eternals. This is circa 1988 or something like that. I think 88. So there's continuity up to 1988. So maybe Ellie has the deluxe essential handbook of superheroes of this particular universe, my made-up universe. Maybe she has that and she sees the Invincible Reindeer stats or something like that. That kind of, plot holes get way more hype than they actually need to have. That's kind of a plot hole that is maybe distracting and might be fun to just fill that in, but ultimately irrelevant. Whereas something like what is actually beyond the blue triangle, who cares? That doesn't really matter. But the Invincible Reindeer's fascination with that, that might be more interesting. Little things like what does he look like? I'll fill that in. A little description that tends to come later. What does he look like? I don't know how much background you really need. Like the Tick, for example, being my big inspiration for this kind of story. You never know about him, but you really don't want to know about him. It'll kind of ruin the Tick to know too much about him, really. But ultimately, it's getting to be 30 minutes, so clearly not keeping it tight and controlled. So I'll wrap it up. But my main point is that if you think about the story process of being this sort of churning ball of emotions and images that consolidate into a form, and this is why the schematic level is, level 3, is so important. The next level is paradox, where you sort of shape it in, opposite forces pulling against each other, and it sort of settles into an orderly form by the third level here. But it's an internal orderly form, so it's just a churning ball of images of an invincible reindeer, this other superhero named Star of Wonder, this normal person drinking hot cocoa on the sideline, just not impressed with anything. All of these are in the possessed head. All these different images are sort of turning here. They settle into the superhero schema, um, and so there's a set of orderly concepts um, that you have an expectation about how a superhero story progresses. I shift that by adding in that mundane juxtaposition there, sort of playing around with these two. Um, Plot holes might be logic problems. So how does she actually know these things? So you might think intellectually, how does she actually know these things? They can be distracting because that level is the destimulating end of the spectrum. So that could be destimulating. By adding too much logic in there, it can be destimulating. So I sort of uh, iron over that little wrinkle with something fun, like the official handbook type of thing. Um, but ultimately, logic is secondary. Internal logic is really the only important thing. Logic is really secondary. Um, and so, in actually shaping it, you're taking that turning ball of images, and you're saying what more can I reveal? What more is really interesting to me? What more am I curious about? Like who this person is, um, and what can I reveal in order to enhance the emotional impact of different parts. So for me, I really like that last little part. How can I really shape it to just enhance that ending? Um, but I'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully the reading will go well and it won't bomb, but if it does, that's life. See you next time.